Hello and welcome to Antoron's weekly Dose of Atheism, episode 2. Last time I gave a detailed account of how I ended up becoming an atheist. This time I wanted to deal with the question, why are you an atheist? But before I answer that question, I want to take a short look at what atheism is and what being an atheist actually means. Yes, I know right now the snake of atheists believe that there is no God will raise its ugly head, like so often when this topic is discussed. Theists love their strawmen, don't they? Yes, there are several dictionaries that offer this definition as the first of several, but just forget this theistically tainted bullshit. Even though one could say that it is an older understanding of what atheism means, the usage of the words atheist and atheism has substantially changed by now, and that is reflected in what most dictionaries have as a second definition of the word. Atheist, a person that does not hold any belief that a God exists. Atheism, the lack of belief in a God. Without theism, God belief / religion. Put together without God or without a belief in a God / without religion. The word lack in the definition is in my opinion problematic because it denotes that there is something missing that a person needs, but it keeps the definition short and to the point, and so that is what many atheists use and state when bothered to define their position. Since I am not bound by these restrictions, my personal definition is a little longer and more detailed. Atheism, the active rejection of unsupported theistic claims about the existence of any God, because no theist that I ever have encountered has been able to meet their burden of proof. Hence, there is no reason to accept their claims. That means that I, as an atheist, actively reject any claim about the existence of a God with good reason, because nobody ever has shown anything that could be considered sufficient evidence to warrant belief in the existence of such a thing. Now, there will be the clever ones saying, but if my God is the universe, love, or the totem pole behind my hut. Yes, I have to admit that these things are real, or at least exist as an abstract, a concept, or a feeling. As in the case of love, which basically is a chemical reaction in our brains. But it would beg the question, why put the God label onto something that has a name and a label that is absolutely sufficient to understand what the thing is? What is gained by calling this thing God, and what can this God do? Take the totem pole, for example. I admit that the pole exists and is real, so your God exists. But if you now go and fall on your knees in front of it and pray for rain, and later it rains, and you claim, my God did that because I prayed for it, that is where the problem starts, because timely correlation does not demonstrate causation, and it rains all the time without you asking your God for it. Or you might ask and it does not rain the next time. I am often asked, how would you define a God? And I normally respond, I do not, because that is what the claimant has to do. But maybe I should say something about what I expect a God to be, and that is an intelligent agent that is able to create a universe. Anything short of that, to me, is not a God, and not even worthy of consideration or discussion. So the totem pole, or love, or anything that is existing contingent in this universe is not a God as I would understand it. I squarely put the burden of proof, again something that will get its own episode further down the road, I hope, if I ever get there, on the person that it belongs to, on the believer, that just by believing in a God already is making the claim that it exists, because belief is not based on nothing, but it is based on the assumption that there is sufficient reason to warrant that belief, to justify that conviction. Anything that does not have this underlying assumption is just a basic assertion, and if anything, can only be justified with faith, which is the excuse people give when they have no good justification for the convictions they so dearly hold. And that is just that. It's basically an assertion, and assertions about existence of something without evidential support have to be dismissed. For me, any discussion is over the moment that someone makes an open appeal to faith. Yes, I know it is often followed in the next sentence by, "But my faith is not just blind faith." This can only be countered by, "Then please present reasonable justification for your faith." And most of the time, first further protestation and then silence will be the result. That person has just admitted to not having any good reason or justification for their position and has, as harsh as it sounds, admitted to being irrational and unreasonable about that particular topic in their lives. They simply do not care about what is rational or true. They just need their God in their lives because it gives them comfort and hope and the promise of salvation, forgiveness of sin, and an eternal life. I can tell them that they are unreasonable ever so often, but to someone who has given up on reason and logic, you cannot logically explain anything. It is like applying medicine to a dead person. It is basically futile. Once more, I'm talking about this topic, not the person in general or any other area of their lives. People who are crazy for God can be absolutely reasonable and even skeptical on most other topic that you want to discuss. And I do not mean to say that any attempt to convince theists that their position is unjustified would be futile, because people can well be reasoned out of a position that they did not reason themselves into. I am an example of that, and so are many other people who today identify as atheists. Just when someone clings to their faith and appeals to it in a discussion, to continue at that point is, in my humble opinion, futile. Does my rejection of the claim that a God exists automatically include the counterclaim that no God can exist, no God does exist? No, quite clearly it does not. All I'm saying is that when a theist states, "I believe that my God exists," which in my reading plainly asserts it is a fact that my God exists, I answer, I do not have such a belief. I do not believe you or accept the underlying assertion because you are unable to provide any verifiable evidence. Insert the gumball analogy here. If we have a closed glass and we have no way to access it, inside are gumballs or marbles, and someone now asks you, "Do you believe the number of balls in the glass is even or odd?" And you say with absolute conviction, "I believe the number is odd." And I tell you, I don't believe that. Am I at the same time saying that I am convinced the number must be even and your guess that the number is odd is wrong? No, all I'm saying is that there is no reason to assume that what basically amounts to a blind guess is actually correct, and that we only will find out if we open the glass and count the balls if the number really is odd or even. But if we cannot access the glass, like I stated before, because there is something between us and the glass that prevents that, then there is no way to actually really find out if the number is odd or if it is even. And in this example, the chances are 50-50 that your guess is correct. Not so in the case of the God claim, because there are thousands of contradicting claims. Yes, either a God exists or it does not. But since any theist is making a claim for a particular God, the odds against them having guessed correctly are just staggering. And in the case of God, we cannot find out if God exists or if it does not. We just have no access to it. Only if the God described is logically incoherent and self-contradicting, like I would claim the biblical God is, we can say that it is impossible that such a God exists. But most gods are defined in such a way that they are imperceptible to the human senses, even with all the equipment that we have invented to enhance them, and hence are indistinguishable from something that does not exist. The rejection of the God claim does not even have to be justified, in my opinion, because any unsupported assertion about the existence of something can and actually should be dismissed without consideration, argument, or evidence. The rejection does not make any counterclaim, it just says, "You have not convinced me." Nobody raises an eyebrow when I say I do not believe Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, or leprechauns actually exist, or would dare to demand evidence from me to show that they don't. But because this is the God claim, all rules of logic go out of the window, and suddenly the one who simply says, "I do not believe that such a thing exists," is asked to provide evidence for their absolutely reasonable position. That is called shifting the burden of proof. But the rejection of unsupported claims is the default position, actually, because when there is no evidence, we simply have to say we cannot establish guilt beyond reasonable doubt. Hence, this God is not guilty of the crime of existing. No one is asked to make a verdict, "This person is innocent," in court. The verdict is always guilty or not guilty. And the rule is that if guilt cannot be established beyond reasonable doubt, the defendant has to be found not guilty. Any God that I have ever been presented with has been acquitted by me from the accusation of existence because of lack of sufficient evidence. I hope that I will get around to make an episode about the gumball and the courtroom analogy by themselves later. The God claim is one of the most extraordinary claims one can make, and extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence to support them. Why is the God claim extraordinary? Because we have no example anywhere for the existence of any God. That you own a dog is a trivial claim because we know dogs exist, and that people own dogs. If you now claim that your dog is invisible, undetectable, and existing out of time and space, that is not only an extraordinary claim, it also means that your dog is indistinguishable from a dog that in fact does not exist. I am sure you have recognized my atheist mantra from the end of last week's episode, hidden in this analogy. Its official name is Argument from Divine Hiddenness, and it basically says a God that does in no recognizable, perceptible, and verifiable way interact with reality is indistinguishable from a God that does not exist. The full version you will hear again at the end of this episode, and I hope that I will deal with it in detail in a later episode. It basically is the one and only reason that I give today when I'm asked, "Why are you an atheist?" There is no evidence, no method to even access or examine these claims about God's existence. Yes, I am a methodological naturalist, not a philosophical naturalist that assumes that actually nature is all there is. But as long as nobody comes up with a method that yields verifiable results when applied to supernatural claims, and especially the God claim, there simply is no justification to accept them as real because we have no access to anything beyond nature. Ever wondered what is more likely? That actually one of the many God claims is correct, and that number is staggering when we consider that basically all sects of all established religions are contradicting themselves in what they attribute to their God, even though they call it by the same name? Or that simply none of them is correct because they all are just figments of human imagination? I have come to my conclusion on that. Have you? That is why I am an atheist. Thank you for listening, and I leave you with my personal atheist mantra. A God that does not in any verifiably perceivable way interact with reality and this universe is indistinguishable from a God that in fact does not exist. There is no reason to have faith in such an entity because even if it existed, we would have no access to it or knowledge about it. We can make no reasonable statements or assumptions about it. We cannot assume that such an entity did anything, let alone created the universe, because there is not the slightest hint that the universe actually was created in any way other than by natural forces. If someone claims that the universe actually was created, they would have to present evidence for that claim that makes the case beyond reasonable doubt and with clear connection to the proclaimed deity. Actually, before it can be claimed that a deity did anything, its existence has to be established independently beyond reasonable doubt first. This statement does not make the claim that such an entity can or does not exist. It just states that it is unreasonable and irrational to accept the claim about the existence of such a being without verifiable evidence.